going to be talking about objective morality. And just by saying objective morality, people already have this idea of what it is I'll be talking about. And if you were to ask anyone outside of a circle like this, they would immediately think they know what I'm talking about when they say objective morality. And there's a difference between what I've come to understand it is and the perceptions that the masses have. And I'm here to say that objective morality has been purposely obfuscated. What it actually is has been obfuscated, which means, for those of you that don't know what that means, it's been purposely confused in the minds of people in order to produce a particular result in the world that psychopathic controllers find favorable for their own lives. So, for those of you that have studied green language, something interesting that I noticed is that if you really think about the phrase objective morality, that phrase consists of the word objective. So what is an objective? An objective is a goal. It's a mission. It's an objective.
What is this? Where's mine?
So the way I see objective morality now is when I think about that phrase, I now understand it as being a phrase that is self-describing. So when we're talking about objective morality, there is a goal to objective morality. So this is going to become a little bit more clear as I start to talk about this a little bit more. So let me put it back to you for a second. Traditionally, when someone brought up the topic of objective morality, what do you typically think of?
Right or wrong?
Yeah, right and wrong.
Ethics.
Conscience.
So if you were to ask just any normal person, is objective or is morality objective or is it subjective? What do you think they would say?
Most of them say subjective.
Okay, why would they say that?
Because that's the lie they've often told.
Yeah.
I mean, basically, like people really think that they create their own reality, and it even comes to like whatever you believe is the truth, like because you believe it.
So a lot of time when people think about objective or subjective morality, they try to talk about examples where it's not really useful to talk about. Like they talk about lying, for example. They say, well, you can make the argument that this type of lying, isn't causing harm, but this other type of lying is causing harm. So therefore, morality must be subjective. Or the topic of, killing. Is killing? Well, you could say, in this particular example, it's not wrong, but in this other example, it is. So that sort of thing, those sort of questions, isn't what I'm talking about when I talk about objective morality. So what the original intention behind objective morality was trying to, my understanding from the mystery schools in ancients, what they're trying to talk about is, what they're trying to express is that there's a certain way of being in the world that produces certain results. And we as humans do not get to decide what type of being in the world produces what result. So objective morality is supposed to describe a particular set of behaviors in the world that lead to the kind of world that we want to live in. So it describes a particular set of behaviors that either lead to a world of order, freedom, and prosperity, or of chaos, slavery, and self-inflicted suffering. That's what the ancients, from my understanding, were trying to talk about when they were talking about objective morality. Now, as you can see, there's a lot of incentive for psychopathic rulers to try to confuse this idea in people's minds because that would serve to their benefit. It would create a world where they end up at the top because they know how things work, and then everyone else, and this pyramid structure that ends up getting created, they end up being subservient to those that are the most knowledgeable about like how objective morality works. And I almost think about this topic as like there being a magician up on stage, like how it's been obfuscated. So what these mind manipulators are basically trying to do as a magician is try to get you to look at their right hand and distract you with all these unnecessarily, basically these useful types of intellectual conversations that don't add any value to your life. They're trying to distract you with this so that you don't look over here on the left hand to see where the real value is. So that's how I started to view this topic now. I guess this would be a good time to, take some questions before I move on, if any have come up. Because this is sort of a new way I'm trying to articulate objective morality to people. It's inherently results oriented. Did you have something?
Oh no, that just struck exactly kind of the question I was going to. How do we determine if something is moral or immoral?
Yeah. So the easiest way to do that is, the easiest way is to use your common sense after you've taken in enough knowledge, and to do a thought experiment. What would the world look like if everyone behaved this way? Would it create a world of order, freedom, and prosperity, or would it end up creating the sort of dog-eat-dog world? Where we end up slaves, and those that are the most ruthless and knowledgeable and can manipulate minds end up at the top of the pyramid. So that basically is how you determine whether something is a sort of behavior is good, objectively moral, or not moral. Like, for example, let's take two different types of lying. Like, you can make the argument that if you're told your significant other that she looked good in a dress and didn't look overweight, if everyone did that, you wouldn't create a world of chaos, slavery, and self-inflicted suffering. So that behavior isn't immoral. However, if you were to lie to people about how health works so that they can't make informed decisions as to how to heal themselves if they need to, if you lie about how money works for your own benefit and it causes significant, this is where the non-aggression principle comes into it. So if it causes harm in some way, then that type of lying would fall under the category of something being objectively immoral.
I think that's the answer you just said. If it causes harm, like that's how
Yeah.
you know. That's the answer to his question. How do you know if something's moral?
If it causes
or
non-consensual
if it causes
harm in some way.
Because
Because this gets a little more convoluted when you introduce contracts into this as well.
Sure.
Because, for example, sorry about the example, but, if a couple wants to engage in some sort of like S&M, like sadomasochistic type of sexual behavior, and there's an understanding between the two that this is what's going to happen because we're both consenting to it, then there's nothing immoral about that. So that's sort of a way where we put our own law on top of natural law. So it kind of sort of hides natural law a little bit, if you want to think about
Which is why
it.
they fool everybody into giving so much consent for all the bullshit that they
Yeah,
do,
that's why
because
there's so much out there.
so they're not being immoral.
Yeah, that's why there's so much out there that's trying to get you to not realize that you're consenting to, through contract. So it's very important to be aware of that. I think Dave had a question first.
I was going to ask if you considered describing it to people as result-oriented morality instead of objective morality.
Yeah.
Because objective morality means, I've been trying to think of how to distinguish between what you mean by objective morality and what everybody else means by objective morality. Results-oriented doesn't.
Yeah, that's actually a good way to put it, because as soon as you say objective morality and you consider the fact that everyone already has an idea as to what that is, you're already fighting an uphill battle at that point to try to correct their misconception of it. So I do like that. Yeah, results-oriented morality. It's sort of like, I mean, this all comes from, you know, study of the occult, you know, the major arcana, the study of the outside world in the minor arcana. And it's the way I see the occult and the study of this stuff, it's like really high-level personal development, like really high-level self-help is how I describe it. But thank you for that point. I think in the future on my shows, I'm going to be referring to it that way from now on, results-oriented morality. I think you were next.
So my question is for I'm dealing with the part of society that is like victim culture, offended by everything, right? I feel like my response is either avoid or just be like, I don't subscribe to the same rule set as you do, or something like, what? Yeah. Do you have any suggestions or advice there?
Well, there's a lot you could do. I mean, it's highly contextual and dependent upon the situation. As far as waking up people to
Like
these
sayings like silence is violence. No, actually, it isn't.
silence is violence.
No,
Well, you could make the case that refusing to educate people about these principles that could end up helping them leaves them in a position where they're ignorant, and then as a result we end up getting a world of chaos, slavery, and self-inflicted suffering. So I am one of those people that subscribes to the idea that staying silent when you see the majority of humanity jumping off a cliff when there's something you could do to educate them, I do see that as immoral. Now you have to be strategic with who you talk to, because there will be people that are more receptive to these types of ideas. But in that case, I would consider silence to be violence.
But then it's like you could, you could extrapolate that on into like a lot, because we all know things that other people should know, and we pass by people every day that we choose not to share our knowledge with. Is that immoral?
I mean, you can't, just from a practical perspective, you can't just talk to everyone like that, because it's going to produce the opposite effect that you intend. So you have to be strategic, but I mean, part of the power of the internet is, you're able to find those people that are actually going to understand the message you want to portray, so you put it out through the internet that way, and then eventually over time, they talk to other people, then they talk to other people, and everyone just sort of receives the information at a time when they're ready to wake up. But yeah, personally, I'm not going out in public and trying to explain objective morality to every single stranger that I meet.
Hey, so I think that's a good topic of objective versus subjective morality. And I think what the challenge is, a common language. Is that your premise? The premise is a common language, right? So what that means to you versus anybody else. And so herein lies the crux of the English language altogether. I mean, so think of the terms being nice versus kind. What's the difference? So the nice thing to do is, it's not all of the kindest thing. The kindest thing to do is to tell somebody the truth. But if you tell somebody the truth, you're not being nice all the time, right? And so this kind of dovetails into everything you're talking about.
Yeah.
So the common language is the key, right? And I think the English language is one of the worst.
Yeah, I've been on a mission to try to incorporate more Latin and Greek into the way that I speak, especially when talking about the different forms of love. I think it's extremely important. I mean, if you want to be able to just convey accurately reality, then you sort of have to do that, because I mean, different types of love. You have eros, you have philos, you have agape. I mean, what are we talking about? It's very important to understand these distinctions, because if this is something you don't understand how to create freedom in order, because this ties into a lot of other occult concepts that are critical to understand. So, thanks for adding that.
You know, from an evolutionary perspective, I mean, my conception of you opened the can of worms. Love is so vastly different today than it was, say, 20 years ago, or even 25 years ago.
Yeah.
Right? And so, you know, as we evolve, as we grow up through our teenage years and stuff, we have this idea based on what our experiences are, which gives us the meaning of these words.
Yeah.
I couldn't have been further from the truth.
Yeah.
It's funny you brought that up because we were actually talking about that before this started. Because our friend Raymond, he hasn't been at one of these events. He's going to come speak at one, but we met him through the class Laura did online, and he's been to the property a couple times. And he was talking about how in his travels he's been talking about this book he's writing, and he's coming to realize that the words he used mean different things to different people, and if he doesn't sort out that they understand the words the same way as he does, that the concept can be completely different. He used the word subconscious as an example, and he's like, this guy had this idea that subconscious was negative because it was sub, but it was below, and that it was came from like a lower consciousness place as opposed to just below your conscious mind, and so he had to like shift it. He started calling it pre-consciousness instead of subconsciousness to try to be less confusing about it to that person, I guess. I don't know.
So can I do an example?
Yeah.
So try and pick that up. Okay, let's do this again. What's your name, Paul?
Yusuf.
Yusuf, I'm Cameron. Very nice to meet you. Try and pick that up. Okay, what you did was succeed both times. There was no trying involved. If I say I'm going to try and do something, I've given myself a valid excuse to fail. 100% of the time. Because I'm a liar. And I'm not lying to you or anyone else. I'm lying to me. Right? Because I lack self. Right? I live my life without a net. I'm either going to do something or I don't. There's none of this bullshit wish. But I lived my life that way for a long time. It's a good out.
Yeah.
Hey.
Try your best. Try your best.
Yeah.
Always, brother.
Can you
Do your best.
explain the three types of love that you were just talking about a little more in depth?
Yeah.
Because you have agape, and then philos is family love. Agape is I'm not sure. Please.
Yeah, agape is just basically the love of truth and freedom. Philos, brotherly love, familial love, and eros is just romantic, lustful love. Those are the distinctions.
Thank you.
And depending upon which type of love you're primarily operating in, will produce very different types of behaviors, and as a result, very different types of results in the external world. So that's why it's so important to understand those distinctions. But just sticking with the English language, we've been sort of ripped off in a sense.
5 minute word.
So
5 minutes?
there's power in words.
Yeah, there's power.
There's so much power in words. And the way we articulate kind of dictates what we manifest.
Yeah, very powerful stuff. And yeah, I've been on a massive journey just studying natural law and these sort of concepts for these last few years. I didn't feel like I truly even had a good grasp on what love actually looks like in the real world, or what evil and good looks like in the real world, until probably about a year ago. I've just had so many misconceptions.
Man, you come a long way, brother.
Can you give an example, please?
Isn't it amazing how
Okay.
much can change in a year?
So, for example, let's take a loving act. Okay. So let's use an example that's very prevalent today. There's a lot of young people in the world that are very kind of lazy and directionless,
Go on.
and they're not doing anything in their lives that's meaningful, that will produce good results for themselves or for the world around them. And eventually they're going to destroy their lives in some way if they don't do something. So an act of love might look confrontational. It might take the form of tough love. It might be like, hey, if you don't do something, you're out of the house, or something like that. You know, a parent talking to their offspring in that way. Because to do the opposite would ensure the child's destruction, at some point in the future. So although it may look like love to some people because you want your child to be comfortable, it's actually not coming from a place of love at all. In fact, I would argue those kind of parents, they behave that way and they tolerate their offspring's behavior out of their own guilt, out of fear and guilt.
Do you agree?
So it's
Dr.
actually
Dustin?
immoral.
Where's Dustin?
So that's an example of a way that love manifests itself in a way that's not obvious to most people. And it's really interesting. Over time, you just start to... It's not immediately obvious to most people how love and fear manifests. You have to just look at the results and then you kind of work back from there. After asking yourself, is this an act of love or fear? So it's about continuously sharpening your discernment. And that's how you start to understand basically natural law and what's moral and what's immoral, what's love, what's fear.
So with love and fear, do you agree that it's like the polarity thing? It's like light and darkness. Like fear is just a lack of love. It's not really a thing. It's just on the same scale. It's just fear is just a lack of love.
Yeah, I think that. I mean, there's nothing I could well, I guess there is something I could point to. You could say, if you turn off a light switch, then it's just the absence of light.
Right.
That's there, that's the darkness. And you turn it on, light is actually
The thing.
So-
a tangible
Light's
thing.
the thing.
Yeah, so for me, fear is lack of faith.
Yeah, it definitely can
I mean,
manifest like that.
It's the opposite side of it, right? And so
Mhm.
I can't live in fear and faith at the same time.
Yeah, that's
But
true.
There's also healthy fears. The vast majority of the fears are selfish and self-centered,
Yeah.
based on something that I think I'm going to lose or something that I might not get.
Yeah.
Call it what it is.
In fear, there are very specific applications in which fear is useful, and that's if you need to get away from a tiger.
Yeah, unless there's a tiger in the
Uh,
room, there's nothing to fear.
But most of the time,
Lion.
like,
Not lion.
you're not supposed to live in that state of fear chronically. That's where it becomes a problem. But in very specific situations, acute fear to preserve your safety from some sort of predator is absolutely necessary. But because humans have been separated from their natural environment so much, and they're being pressured in unnatural ways to stay in that state of chronic fear all the time, that is what creates so much dysfunction in the world. It's what has created the manifestation that we're seeing right now.
So we do that.
Yeah.
But the core function of the ego, it's a center of self-survival. It's
Yeah.
utilized for fight and flight. That's why it was developed. But in the mind of someone wired the way I'm wired, for instance, I used to get into fight or flight over everything because
Yep.
I needed an excuse in order to behave the way I wanted to behave when I wanted to behave that way.
Yeah.
It's been a long time.
When you live in chronic fear, all your thoughts just get rationalized around that fear
Immediately.
to justify it.
I mean,
And people aren't even necessarily aware that they're doing this.
right?
They think whatever fear they're feeling at the time is totally valid, but it's because they haven't developed that discernment, or maybe it could be some sort of physical health problem that's keeping them stuck in the R complex of the brain, the fight or flight response. There could be a variety of reasons why they're in chronic fear. But it's about developing that discernment and that knowledge that you can't create a good life living in chronic fear, and then after realizing that, overcoming that animalistic consciousness to create something functional, something that works in the world, and stop living in a dysfunctional way. So,
I blame the food industry.
yeah, they play a big
I mean,
role.
that's an amygdala response. The way our
Pharmaceutical
body
industry,
digests and It's perfect exactly the way it is, but when you put all these other things into it, it affects the way our natural chemistry is supposed to work.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's very true.
that's a big
All right,
part.
get in the boot.
Time is up. Thank you, sir. You're awesome.
Thanks, Justin.